So I did that for a year. And then I said, look, Kirsten, like I love being in community but I want to learn policy in Washington. It is critical for me if I'm going to be in public service to really understand how it's done on a federal level. And so she gave me the opportunity to move down to her DC office and work on immigration and healthcare and a variety of other issues where I really saw how the sausage was made. Yeah. Some of it a little traumatizing.
Welcome to Career Cheat Code. In this podcast, you'll hear how everyday people impact the world through their careers. Learn about their journey, career hacks, and obstacles along the way. Whether you're already having the impact you want or are searching for it, this is the podcast for you. On today's episode, we have someone who wanted to be a psychologist and now does diversity, equity, and inclusion globally for a Fortune 500 company. Let's start the week with Karina Cabrera. Karina.
Hi.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be part of your show. Thank you.
I appreciate you taking the time to connect, but let's dive right in. Let's tell the world what it is you do for a living.
Perfect. So I am a senior manager at Accenture, where I am helping to build out our DEI practice for our global clients. We have a team that does it internally, but my team specifically focuses on our global clients. How do we help them have a more inclusive environment, have them sort of show up properly as leaders, right? And how do we measure it? And how do we create different cultures based on the need of the employees?
Got it. What does that mean on a day-to-day for you? What do you do?
The reason I like the job is because every day is such a different day and my clients are so different. So, for example, a few days ago, I was working for one of my clients that is in the public sector, and we were doing a design thinking workshop, trying to really figure out what are their pain points? What are they trying to solve? What are their goals? Because the reality is that DEI is not just like a unconscious bias training. We tend to approach this not as programmatic, but systemic. And so for this particular organization, we were really trying to help them hone in on, what do their employees want? What do they need? What are they missing? So it was like an all-day workshop trying to really assess that, get that out of them, and then figure out priorities and short-term wins. So that is exciting to me because every day is different. That was just one day this week. Then another day I'm working on, a strategy deck for another client based on all the information that they've given me, interviews that I've had, and really figuring out what are the metrics for them to improve, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not about, as I said before, one, unconscious bias training. It's like, how do you measure this? How do you measure behavior change? So I really enjoy that.
That's great.
Side of my work. Yeah.
Is this what you always wanted to do for a living?
No, I didn't know that this was like a field when I was growing up. I think I mentioned to you as a joke, but it was really true that when I was growing up, I wanted to be a psychologist because I felt that there was a lot of mental health issues in my family. And I guess I'm a control freak and wanted to just make sure everybody was good and control them and help them sort of understand that they don't have to live that way. And so I thought, hey, maybe if I get an expertise in this, I can help sort of save my family. But I think that was more sort of trauma and emotional pain where I was coming from than a passion that I had to be a psychologist. But luckily that evolved. And I did study that in undergrad, but then quickly had a little more self-awareness as I matured and got older and was exposed to just a variety of people. I realized that that's really not my thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about your upbringing. Where'd you grow up? How was that upbringing? And if you are willing to share what some of those experiences were that made you want to get into that field.
Sure. So I was born and raised in New York, Washington Heights and Inwood. I always say both because we moved a lot. I think, when I was a kid, we moved like 6 to 8 times. And, one time we had a stint where we moved to Boston for like 6-7 months. And part of that is because my mom was a single mom and I had an older brother that was always misbehaving, always in trouble. Unfortunately, he got into drug use. And so there was a lot of, domestic violence in my house. And I think that the only way that my mother could cope was like, oh, let me just get him into a new environment. He'll be better once I get him into a new place, into a new school. And that just wasn't the case, I think, hindsight is always 2020. It was obvious that he needed more help. But I say we, but I shouldn't say we because I was a kid. But again, I always felt that I was like the parent in my house. And I mean, it was tough for a while for us. I mean, I remember living in the place that we lived the most was when I lived on 211 in Isham. And I remember always having my sneakers by my bed and never sleeping with like just a top. Like I always had to sleep with pants because I didn't know how my brother was going to show up in the middle of the night. And so my mom and my little brother, we all had our shoes just in case we had to like run out. And that was like an often occurrence. And we would, in the middle of the night, he would come home just not in a good state. And we were scared for our lives. And so we would leave like at 3:00 in the morning, whatever time, 2:00, 5:00 in the morning, run out of the house, try to get a cab to go to my grandparents' house that lived on 183rd. And my grandpa was the sweetest man, didn't read or write. And he just would open the door and he knew we were in trouble. He would never say anything and just give us a place to stay. And we just had that rhythm for a really long time. And I didn't really understand the impact that it had on my nervous system and my life. It was just a mess until I the day that I realized that I could escape this sort of madness was when in my high school, we started talking about college applications and I was like, oh, I can like live at the college. I was like, oh my God, that's like my ticket out of my house. And so I was like, okay, I'm determined to do this. But then unfortunately, I didn't have anybody to walk me through the application process. Like it was, no one did that. And so no one had gone to college, in my house. So I had to sort of navigate on my own. And, the day of my SATs, I remember I didn't have an alarm clock, or I did have one, but I didn't want to turn it on because I didn't want to wake up my brother at whatever time he came home. And so I told my girlfriend, hey, call me, let it ring twice, and then I'll know to wake up. Right. And it was like 5:30 or 6:00 because those tests were really early. And she did just that. My brother had gotten home like 30 minutes before. And she rings twice and I run over to like make sure it doesn't ring anymore. And he's like had an episode where he thought that I was hanging up on his friends or something. And so unfortunately, he tried to take my life that morning. And I had to run out of my house. I had no shoes on and I ran to my friend's house. And, that at that moment, I was like, I could not take the test, right? Because I was so nervous. I mean, that's an understatement, but there were a lot of emotions going through my body. And I said, okay, this is a pivotal moment for me. And I was like talking to myself. I was like, Karina, this is a pivotal moment for you. It's either you're going to take the test and try to get out of the house, or just don't take it because this is too hard, And I decided to take the test. I asked my friend for clothes and for like shoes. And I didn't do well because I just wasn't in the right state. I was a little defeated and I just applied to one school that my counselor had said, oh, you should apply to this one Catholic school. And I was like, oh, okay. And I got in and I was just so happy to leave my house.
I hear you.
It was wonderful to like be able to explore who I am on my own and not have the noises of family and friends telling you who you need to be.
Absolutely. I will share that, that was a really big motivator for me too, going to college was how do I get myself removed from my immediate household and my environment generally? I felt like that was going to be pivotal in setting up my mindset for the future. And it did, right? And it's just a matter of stepping out of that and growing into yourself, not completely attached to everything going on around you that you grew up with. So one, kudos to you for even
Yeah.
persevering through that day, right? Through that moment, understanding that that is a very important moment. Taking SATs, of course, they give them multiple times a year. So you could have given yourself some
I
grace
didn't
to come
know.
back. Right.
I didn't know.
But you felt like, you know what, I'm going to make it through it and I'm going to go do it.
Yeah.
And shout out to you for that, because that's huge.
Thank you.
And I also grew up in the Heights. So, you know, we have a lot of ties, even though our paths didn't merge until later in life. But, you know, I think it's I always love hearing folks that are from the same neighborhood or from similar neighborhoods that persevere similar things, you know, will come out and do some great things.
Yeah. You know, I don't want to get all spiritual on us, but I always had like a knowing that even if there was like turmoil around me, that it was temporary. It was a weird sort of, I grew up Catholic, but I by no means am a practicing Catholic. I think I have a closer relationship with God, or whomever you want to call it, on my own, that I don't really need a priest to be in the middle of my relationship.
Fair enough.
And it was just like a knowing, like, God's like, it's going to be fine. Just get through this, and you're going to be able to live the life that you want to lead. And it has happened just that way.
Love that. Okay, so let's talk about it. What was this small or this Catholic school that you applied to? Did you get in, and how did that go?
So I did get in, and I literally had an asthma attack when I got the letter, because I was like, thank you, God, I'm out of my house. It's Mount St. Mary College. And I became an RA. I was like a orientation leader. I just became so active. I was vice president of the Latino Student Union. I was senior class president. I just didn't know I had all this stuff in me. And it was just, I loved every moment of just being with people and being active and being out in community. So that was my experience. But I will say, for those that are listening and that are in college, this is like a cheat tip, or what do you call it? Cheat code. The cheat code is, I always wanted to like be happy at whatever I did. And so I was very mindful that in college, I didn't know who I wanted to be. I didn't know what populations I wanted to work with. And so I decided every single year I was going to work with a different group of different population of folks, to see if I wanted to work with kids, if I wanted to work with seniors, if I wanted to work at a nonprofit or the private sector. And so I did that every single year to figure out what I wanted. And I recommend that, because we don't often know, because it's about exposure to different groups and what lights you up. You sometimes won't know until you're in that room and you're like, oh, I love working with kids, or, I want to work in a hospital, whatever that thing is. Like, expose yourself to these different things so that you could have a better sense of who you are and what you want to do. So that was one thing I did that was great. Another thing I did was subscribe to Time magazine when I was like in college. And I know this sounds corny, but it just opened my eyes to different things and different cities and problems and how companies were thinking. And that was the first time I got exposed to, like, there was an article about best cities in the country, and it talked about San Francisco. From that day on, I fell in love with the idea of moving to California. And I kept telling my family and friends, the week after I graduate college, I'm moving to California. They thought I was crazy. They're like, you're not going anywhere. You don't know anyone there. Like, what are you going to do? And I was like, please believe me, I'm moving to California. So the week before, my RD was like, hey, Karina, I hear you're moving to California. I know you don't have a job or anything lined up. Let me help you become the RD for the summer at Berkeley, so that you could at least have money, have a stipend, and then have a place to live. I was like, thank you. And that I did that the next week of graduation. I left by myself and moved to California. It was the best thing for me. It was like therapeutic. It was an opportunity for me to be alone and just like find myself. I would go out. I'll share something a little more lighthearted here. I remember I lived with guys, because I was like, I don't want to live with girls, because I'm very feminine, but I have I can hang out with the guys. And I was like, I don't want to live with girls. I'm going to live with two guys. So I told my mom, don't worry, they're gay. So she goes, oh, okay. And I remember one day I went to like this bar and it was like right before Halloween. And in New York, you know, people dress up when they go to bars and stuff, and some places, at least back in the day. I was like, oh, I'm gonna dress up. And my girlfriends in New York were like, you're gonna dress up, you should dress up. And like, you know, I know we know you're alone, you have no friends. I was like, yeah, I'm dressing up. I'm dressing up. So I go to this bar, no one's dressed up. I'm the only one in a freaking Halloween costume.
Oh, that's great.
But anyway, the point of that is like, I was just like exploring and like living life and like letting go of that pain that I had to live through.
Mm.
And that's when I got into politics. So,
Okay. So a few points of clarification. One,
yes.
how far was your school from home? Two,
Yes.
what degree did you actually graduate with?
Yes.
And three, what is an RD? I know what it is,
Oh,
but there may
okay,
be folks that don't know.
Yes. So it was about an hour away from my house.
Okay.
My mom was very happy because I was close to home.
Mm-hmm.
And then I graduated with a BA in psychology and minors in business and public relations.
Okay.
I did go on to get my master's in urban policy at the New School. And then the third question is an RD. It's a resident director.
Got it.
But I was a resident assistant when I first started.
Got it. Okay. So you're in Berkeley and you're there as a resident director, making sure that folks on campus are doing the right things, behaving and
Yes.
acting like fools and keeping, you know, the noise down and such, and keeping a healthy, safe, fun environment that is inclusive.
Yes.
Okay. So how long did you do that for? And what was your move after that?
So I did it for the summer, and then, you know, the summer was ending and I was like, oh man, I need a plan. So I was like, I want to take a class. So I started taking a class at Berkeley because they allowed the RDs to take free classes. I was like, I want to try marketing. And I think that that's the other piece of it, is that I've always been curious and like wanting to learn different things. So I was like, oh, maybe marketing is something I'd be interested in. And so I took the class. And the great thing about the class is that I met some friends, and I met one person in particular that said, hey, come volunteer on a political campaign with me. And that gave me the exposure to learn about politics, to fall in love with politics, to be active in community. After being an RD at Berkeley, I found a place with the two guys. And then I got a job at the Board of Elections in San Francisco City Hall.
Got it.
And that was like a short-term thing. And I was like, how do you get, and I don't know if you've ever been to San Francisco City Hall, but it's really majestic and beautiful. And the Board of Elections was in the basement. And I was like, oh, I don't like this. I was like, how do you get to those offices up there? They're just gorgeous. And someone was like, why don't you go ask to see if you could be an intern? And I was like, really? Oh, God. So I had to go through these marble stairs. I was so intimidated. And it was like right before the Christmas holidays. And so it was quiet. There weren't a lot of people around. And I always say this story, but it just took me a lot of effort to just go up those stairs, right? Like, who is this girl? And I went upstairs, and this man, and then I came down because this woman was very rude to me. She goes, no one's here. It's right before the holidays. You'll have to come back in January. And I was like, oh, okay, no problem. I was like, if only this woman knew how hard it was for me to go up these stairs. And I guess I looked a little defeated. And as I was going down the stairs, this man's like, hey, you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm fine. I was just trying to, get an internship or learn about it. And the woman sort of slammed the door in my face, essentially. And he's like, well, why don't you follow me? And I was like, does this man not know I'm from New York? I'm not following. And he's like, you're going to be okay, I promise. And I was like, okay. So he had all these keys. He opens the door. And it turns out he was the president of the Board of Supervisors at San Francisco City Hall. Wow. And for those that don't know, the Board of Supervisors is essentially the city council of the city. And he was the president of it. And he asked me my story, and he told, that was a Friday, and he asked me to start on Monday. Wow. And so I started interning at City Hall. And it was because I decided to be brave. And I always tell people, like, there's so much fear and like doubt, but I still go and do the thing that I want to do. Like the worst thing that they could say is no, right? And I hope that people take that from this interview is like, just try. If they say no, that's okay. Ask again, ask someone else.
That's been clear throughout our time talking is you have a lot of reasons to not be brave, and yet you continue to be brave. And it gives results, right? And it continues to steer the direction of your life, of your career.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So after that, well, while I was doing the internship, as I said before, I fell in love with like helping people and learning about policy and giving back and like helping seniors like get their social security check. Like all that stuff made me really happy. And then I decided simultaneously I was going to apply to this women's leadership program in California. So I got in, and so I was doing that simultaneously. And then unfortunately 9/11 happened, and I was compelled to go back home and be with my family. My mom and everyone was just really scared, and they thought that something was going to happen in San Francisco, like one of the bridges was going to be blown up. And so I decided to come back home, and that's when I tapped into the network that I had started creating, like this Woodhall group. Their headquarters were in New York. So I tapped into them, and they got me involved with like the Young Democrats. And so that's how it sort of snowballed, and my career in politics and government really flourished.
Okay. Tell me what about politics was appealing to you, and did you have a sense of what type of role you wanted to play in that space?
I mean, I guess what appealed to me is that there were so many injustices for my family, how people were treated based on the color of their skin, based on their zip code. And I didn't think that was right. And I wanted to do something about it.
Got it.
I mean, that's why I didn't think it was fair that certain people were treated better because they had more money or because they were white. And so I wanted to right those wrongs.
Okay.
In my own way.
Yeah. And at that point, did you see yourself ultimately running for office, or what did you think your role in that space would be?
I feel like in the beginning when I started, I didn't have the idea of running for office. I thought I would be like a chief of staff or like, managing the elected. But then after a while, I was like, I could do this too. So there was some part of me that was like, yeah, I could be an elected official at some point and represent my community properly. But then I pivoted and decided that there were other ways for me to impact my community. And I wanted to be very careful not to allow my ego to make decisions for what I wanted to do, right? And I think that if you get really enmeshed in politics and government, in any field, right, and you get a sense of power, that could be dangerous if you don't check it. And I just saw so many people around me not checking it. And I was like, ooh, this is dangerous. This doesn't feel good to me. And so I was like, let me explore other ways that I could be impactful.
That makes sense. So tell me, a few years later, you decided to go to grad school. So tell me about what led to that decision and what did you want to come out of that with?
I mean, to be very honest and blunt, I thought that I needed to get as many degrees as possible as a woman of color, as a first generation, so that people thought I was worthy and smart. I thought that after my master's, I was like, okay, great, I'll check it off the box and then I'll go to law school. I was like, that'll show people how smart our community is. So it was more of that than like the actual love of wanting to go to law school or anything else. I decided that I got a job at the New York City Comptroller's office. That was my first government job. And there I said, I actually want to go to the legal division or something pertaining to law. And so I went into the Department of Investigations and I quickly realized this was not for me. But it was more about others than me, And again, hindsight is 20/20.
Absolutely. So you got your master's in urban policy from the new school?
Yes.
And did you feel like you got what you wanted out of that school or out of a master's program, right? Like it's a big investment, time, money, everything. Do you feel like it's helped you? And then two, what'd you do after that?
So If I could do it all over again, is how I answer it. I would have waited.
Mm.
I would have waited a few more years.
Mm.
So I could really focus on the things that I love, right? Instead of just getting a master's or getting a degree just to get a degree. I think I would have waited a little longer.
Okay.
But I got a good network, and some of those folks, like Maria went to the new school, and that's how I met Maria Osorio,
Yes.
that works in New York City government, and some other amazing people. And everything you do in life, I do want to say this, like, I say hindsight's 2020. But it wasn't bad for me, right? Like any decision we make, it's not like the worst thing ever. It's not the wrong decision.
Mm.
So I don't want people to like be stuck in like, oh man, I shouldn't have done X, or I shouldn't have taken that job or that role. I feel like in any place that we're at, we get to learn something. We have to take something away from that, even if it's not perfect, right? There's like a lesson there. I feel like that is something that I've finally learned, that anywhere you are is good enough. You just got to make the most of it and get something out of it. And then you can get to the next thing.
Love that. Okay. You mentioned you worked at New York City Comptroller's Office. You've actually worked at all levels of government, right? And you've worked for some pretty influential and important folks in politics. You want to talk about some of those?
Yeah. Well, I want to give a shout out to Bill Thompson. He was amazing to me. He's like my uncle. He was my, one of my first mentors, and really took me under his wing and showed me New York City politics. And I really appreciate that.
For those that don't know who Bill Thompson is, who is Bill Thompson?
Yeah. So Bill Thompson was New York City Comptroller at that time, like in the 2000s. I don't know exactly when, 2005 or 6. And then he ran for mayor. He ran against Bloomberg. And I will say, Bill, don't hate me for saying this, but like when Bill decided to run for office, that's when I realized that I needed to leave. One, because I don't believe in staying at one employer for the rest of your life. I think that is, at least for me, I just feel like I get stagnant, right? I'm not gaining more skills. I'm not meeting new people. I'm not learning new things, exposed to new experiences. And so I think it's critical to stay with an employer for, I'll say 3 to 4 years. I stayed with him almost 6, and I think it was a little too long, but that's okay. And then he asked me to work on his reelection, his campaign, and I said no. And at the same time, Senator Gillibrand was appointed to Hillary Clinton's seat, and so she asked me to be on her team. And she and I had been part of all these different women's groups in New York, like helping women get involved in politics and raising money for women candidates. And so she had asked me to be part of her team. And I said, you know what? I think I got to challenge myself. This is what I want to do. She asked me to stay in her New York office for, I stayed there a year. I was her director of intergovernmental affairs. And she's like, look, people don't know me in New York. I need your help. So I did that for a year. And then I said, look, Kirsten, like I love being in community, but I want to learn policy in Washington. It is critical for me, if I'm going to be in public service, to really understand how it's done on a federal level. And so she gave me the opportunity to move down to her DC office and work on immigration and healthcare and a variety of other issues where I really saw how the sausage was made. Yeah. Some of it a little traumatizing.
Right. So what does that type of role look like? What were you tasked with doing when you went to DC?
So that it's like you're juggling multiple things, just like I do now. I guess it's a thing I like. It's very fast paced. I mean, let's say, for example, on healthcare, all of the healthcare advocates and lobbyists, like pharmaceutical, all those folks come and meet with you to talk about any legislation that they'd like your senator to sign on to, or for your senator to initiate to sort of solve a problem. And then you have like cancer groups or reproductive groups talking about how certain bills will hurt them if the senator signs on. So that's sort of one thing. And then 2 is like working on initiatives that impact New York, right? Any legislation that we can create to ease any hardship for New Yorkers. So I'd work on that legislation.
That's awesome. Okay. How long did you do that?
So awesome. I did that for about 5 years.
Okay. Again, breaking your 3 to 4 year rule.
I know.
That comes with experience.
That's true. Thank you for calling me out. Right. But I I was there too long. I think I was having too much fun.
Hmm.
And then there came a point, I had my first daughter, and I was like, oh, this is so hard. I don't know how to be a working mom and work in the US Senate. It was just really, really hard. I didn't have family in DC. I didn't have a network to and honestly, here's the real truth. I didn't know how to ask for help. I thought it was me being weak. Because I grew up in a, Latino environment where you got to do everything. Who cares if you're tired? And I think I still had that mentality where it's no, I'm fine. I'm fine. And inside I was dying, right? Because I wasn't asking for help. And I was like, okay, I got to get out of here. And so I was like, oh, the thing that you do is you become a lobbyist, right? I'll make money finally. And every interview I went to, I just had a stomach ache. It just I felt like my body was this is not what you want to do. But I was like, I have to do this because I have to make money for my family. And for a year, I got rejected from so many places, and it really bruised my ego. And then I sort of prayed about it, and I was like, okay, what is it? Just take your time, figure it out, start having conversations with folks, and just be the best person you can be. And I started sort of being open in that way. And then I got a call to have coffee with a friend that worked at the White House. And we started talking. And then after the coffee, she's like, hey, would you like my position? And I was like, what's happening? And she goes, I'm going to be moving to another agency. I think you would be amazing given your skill set. Send me your resume. I'm going to put you through the process so you can interview and see if it makes sense. And that was the best coffee I ever had. I was like, okay, yes. I never thought in my wildest dreams that it was something I would get to do. And it was amazing.
Absolutely. But it's, it's a testament to people seeing you deliver and show the worth of your work and be consistent, right? In a way that someone, for you, is just a coffee. For this person is, I need to have people come in and take my role in a way that is responsible and responsive to the work that I have built and can continue to do and build on that. And I see you, and I think you may be, one, interested, and two, a good fit, right? So it's not like this person then goes back and says, you're the person, but come and have conversations and let's see if this works. And if it's a good fit for both parties, then you do that.
Yeah, no, it was the best experience for me. And I felt like, this is so corny, but every time I walked into the White House, I just felt one, very grateful, but two, I had a responsibility for my community, And again, this was me. It's not like my community was, but it was just I want to be the best version of me for my community. And because I want there to be more Karinas here. There shouldn't just be one. At that point, I think I was the only Dominican that was working at that time. There had been other Dominicans before, and so I just felt this sense of don't mess it up.
Yeah, absolutely. What was your actual role there? And this is during the Obama administration, right?
Yes, please. Let's make sure we say that so people don't get confused. This was during the Obama administration, towards the end, and I was the director of congressional affairs. And that was within the personnel office, the presidential personnel office. So it was my first exposure to HR and DEI. And that's where I started to fall in love with it. And I realized that you can make a difference in that space and really open up doors for folks that look like you and I.
What was your actual role there?
So I was managing a lot of the congressional relationships and national groups to help expand the pipeline, right, of who we were hiring. So I was going out to a lot of community events and meetings with elected officials to help them understand, one, the process to be a political appointee, and just to walk them through the whole, because it is daunting, it is overwhelming. People, it's really hard to get in and to be a political appointee. So I was trying to demystify the process and just building relationships with key people.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay, so you were there towards the end of the administration. What did you do after that?
So then I got pregnant again, and I said, okay, I feel like I've learned a lot at the presidential personnel office. I want to, before the administration ends, I really want to have an opportunity to work at a federal agency. And so a friend that was working at the Department of Energy had pinged me and said, hey, we really need somebody in our InterGov office to help manage and lead. And I said, perfect. And so I did that because it was, again, an opportunity to learn something new. And so I did that till the very end. And then my husband and I were both out of a job because he was working as Hillary Clinton's speechwriter when she was running for president in New York. He had left DC. So I'm pregnant, like biggest belly in the world. And then I have a toddler. I'm by myself in DC. My husband's in New York. And we're like, okay, we're going to sacrifice for this country because we want Hillary to be president. And then at the end, we both are out of a job because she obviously loses. And then Obama obviously has to leave office. And so we looked at each other. We're like, oh, wow, we had just bought our first place. We had a mortgage. I said, I don't want to go back to New York. You figure out where we're going to go next, and I will adjust. And so he found a job here in the Bay Area in tech. And then I decided to, once I got here, to just start my entrepreneurial journey, focused on DEI.
Wow. Okay. So why DEI versus, you have a lot of government experience at that point?
I was burnt out. I was burnt out. And, when I got here, that's when Trump really went hard. And it was just so toxic. And after being in government for like 15 years, again, I started thinking about, okay, there's other ways to help communities. There's other ways to do that. Like sometimes we get stuck on like, this is the only way I can help. I must be an elected official or I must be this. And that's just not true. And so I said, I want to take a moment to like figure out what that thing is, where I can still be active, still help, and hey, by the way, make some money.
Absolutely.
And so that's why I was like, I want to focus on the workplace. Like, how do you combat the workplace and figure out? Because like, look, at the end of the day, I guess part of what I was thinking, there's so much money in Silicon Valley. And for our community to like continue to progress, it is about wealth building. And so for me, I was like, what better way than to make inroads for our communities of color in tech?
Absolutely.
That's how I was thinking about it.
So what did that look like? Did you become now a consultant that is working with organizations, recruiting talent in other places? Or like, what did that look like?
Yeah. So for me, it first started, thank you for asking. So I want folks to know that I didn't have everything lined up. I didn't know exactly where. So just follow this thread. And my thread was like, okay, I really care about this issue. I'm going to start talking about it. Right. And so I started going to people started inviting me on panels, and I started going to conferences and events and really getting out there like a thought leader around this topic. And slowly but surely, I met my business partner, and she had done executive recruiting for a really long time. And I said, that's not really my thing. But I said, okay, I'd consider it if you focus executive recruiting for people of color. And so we did that. And so I did the executive recruiting for a little bit, but I felt that something was missing and that a lot of the people that we were hiring weren't staying very long. And so I thought that it's about fixing the system, and that's where the consulting side came in.
Got it.
So it was like a natural progression. I guess that's my point in all of this.
Okay. Yeah. So you did this for a little while. How long did that last? And what did you gain from that time?
Yeah, I did that for about 3 years. And then George Floyd happened. And I had this feeling inside that I wanted to scale my work, that it wasn't enough to just do these small consulting gigs with these companies were just so bite-sized, right? And they were just programmatic and they could just go away next year, right? And so I had this feeling like I want to scale this, and I want this to be embedded in the structures, and right, I want to help redo these structures. And so one of my clients was Accenture, and the woman that I worked with, she's so lovely. We became, very friendly. And at one point I said, you know what, Mary, I think I am going to look for something else. I love my business partner. I love what we're doing, but I want to do more. I want to help more people. And she's like, hey, why don't you consider coming into Accenture? We are building out our DEI practice. You would be great. And I honestly was like, I don't know. It's such a big firm. Am I really going to make an impact? Is it just more process over people? And she's like, just give it a try. And I did. And here I am.
Got it. And so for those that don't know, what does Accenture do?
Sure. So it's a global consulting firm where we work on a variety of areas to help clients sort of solve complex problems from like technology. I mean, we're really known for our technology and like tech transformation, culture transformation. And then we do like the HR piece and systems analysis, all of the wonky stuff.
Got it.
I stay in my lane.
Okay. So, I think you're carving out this lane within the DEI space, right? Tell me some of the challenges that you've come across and some of the ways that you've overcome them in this space, right? Because I'd imagine if you're working with other organizations, their cultures are different. Their reasons why they're engaging in the work is different. Their all of it. So would love to hear from you how that.
So can I ask just a clarifying question? So challenges that I've seen from my clients or just in general within the DEI space?
I guess a little bit of both. I was more talking the former. So when you're talking to clients, like what are some of the things they're really trying to overcome and need support with? And how are you able to help them with that?
So good question. It obviously varies. Some, to be honest, want to do that programmatic work. Right? They just want to do a set of trainings, unconscious bias training, cultural competency, and then that's it. And I don't think you solve problems in that way, right? That's like a quick hit, a quick fix. Right. And you're not getting to the root cause of it. And so I find that to be a problem. I find anytime someone wants to say, hey, can you just do this one, DEI event? Yeah, we're not solving at the heart of what's happening in the culture. And you're not really moving hearts and minds if you're not doing it consistently, right? Like the way you change behavior, it is by measuring it, by testing it, by constantly giving bite-sized information on how to be this new way, right? How to be this inclusive leader. It's not like, hey, you take a training and it's done. And so I find that to be a problem.
That makes sense. I know you've been very intentional through your career and you've had some professional development. Like I know you went through the Coro program. Would love to hear a little bit about that experience and why you did that. And if there are any other programs that you've also participated in. I
decided to apply to Coro because I knew that I needed to refine my skills. And I knew I wasn't the leader that I wanted to be. I knew there was more development that I needed. And so I read about it. Someone told me about it. And I thought that that was just perfect to be exposed to people in a variety of industries, all coming together to sort of try to figure out how to solve a problem within a city. I thought that was like magic. I just loved the whole premise of it. And again, I knew the things that were lacking in me. And I was like, oh, this will help sharpen my skills. So I did that. And I mentioned that I also did the Woodhull Women's Institute for Ethical Leadership. And so I did that right after college when I was living in California.
What is that?
So it's similar to Coro, but this one's focused on all women and coming together to sharpen your skills, negotiation, public speaking, interpersonal. And it creates like a network of women that you can rely on.
Got it.
And get support. So that was like my first exposure to a leadership program like that.
Absolutely. You've also been very involved. I know you sit on a couple of boards. Any that you want to talk about and why you're involved in those. And you're also a person that has been widely recognized for your work. And would love to hear some of that as well.
Sure. So yes, I love to feel like I'm a part of community. I think that's why I am on the boards. It's not I don't get paid for them. One day I will graduate and be on a paid board. But as of right now, I love to just give back. And like when I first started, I was in New York. I was on the Hispanics and the arts because I love art and culture. And so Radhy Cabrera invited me to join that board. And mostly it was fundraising, to be honest, but that's okay. It's to give exposure to our artists. And then I've also been on the DNC. They had a women's fundraising arm. And as I mentioned before, Kirsten Gillibrand was the president of it, and I was on the board of it, helping women to be in elected office. And then now, just recently, I guess 2 years, I'm on the board of Girls Leadership. It's a national organization that helps young girls find their voice and strengthen their voice to become leaders of tomorrow.
That makes sense. Okay. And I know you've also been, recognized for some of your work, and including, I think this year you're supposed to be at the Dominican Day Parade for a reason. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I'm so excited. I know people get excited when they get these like New York Times or these other prestigious like awards, but the awards that have meant the most to me are the ones that come from my community. Like I got a few years ago, I think it's like Woman of the Year, Mujeres Descatadas from El Diario La Prensa. And that was such an emotional day for me because I felt like my community was seeing me and seeing the work that I was doing. And then I still have the award here. You could see, oh my God, it was so many years ago.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And then the other one is from the Dominican Day Parade, the National Dominican Day Parade, which I'm very, very excited about. And they are honoring me because of my work in DEI, which I really appreciate. And so that is in August. I'm sure you got a lot of New Yorkers listening to your podcast, so they all know when it happens. Just know that I'm working on my wave every day because I'll be waving the whole time. Right. No, I'm just kidding.
So first of all, that's great. I can totally picture it. Earlier, you mentioned, you wanted to work in lobbying because you felt like that was going to be the most money that you can possibly achieve at the time.
Yeah.
Since then, you've continuously grown in your career. I think it's important for people to have a sense of following what you want and sticking to it and growing within that can also lead to you getting well compensated for your work. We'd love to hear a range of how much money folks can make in this type of space, given, your years of experience.
Yeah. Well, I'll start by saying that when I started government, I was making $40,000, and I was very upset because I started with 3 other men and they all got paid more than me. And I was the only one with that I was getting my master's and I had all this other experience and it didn't matter. And I mentioned it and they basically said, oh, well, they're older, so they're going to get paid more. And so that was like my first taste of feeling like that wasn't right. If I'm doing the same role that they're going to do, same title, I deserve to get the same amount, but that didn't happen. And so I just sort of swallowed it. And I think I've had a chip on my shoulder ever since. And fast forward to today, my job is really hard. It's very intense. And I think part of the reason I'm proud to be there, it's because I've finally made it to a different bracket financially, to be honest.
Absolutely.
It's not my only motivating factor of working there, but it is nice to get compensated properly. And, I'll tell you that the range for a senior manager, just for those that don't know, it's equivalent to a VP in most other places. But we don't have VPs and we don't have directors. So it's senior manager. And then after that, you become an MD. So that's just so people understand the hierarchy at Accenture. And then we have, junior consultants below. And then, so the range is again, it all depends. So New York, San Francisco, sometimes DC and LA tend to have the highest salaries. And it ranges between $250 and $450.
Got it. That makes sense.
And that, that doesn't include bonus and equity and all these other benefits that you get.
See, I appreciate that. And I think, part of the reason why I started this show is because I feel like a lot of us just, as you mentioned earlier, we don't know these careers exist, right? And we don't know that you can also make a lot of money by going into these different fields. And when we're growing up, as what your mom and your parents know is oh, you could be a lawyer, a doctor, a dentist, things that they see and that they encounter every day. But then there's so much more. And there are so many ways that you can have impact and drive change and leverage your skill sets in an earnest, in like a good way, and make some good money.
And make some good money.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And just to expand a little bit more, just so people have a better sense. And once you make MD, you can make millions of dollars. So
that makes sense.
Just so folks know.
I appreciate that.
That there's a path to making money in these big firms.
Are there any forms of media that you've consumed that have helped you personally or professionally? That could be a book, that could be a movie, a show, a podcast that you're like, listening to this really shaped my perspective in a particular way.
Yeah. I'll tell you a show when I was growing up. Oh my God, it's escaping me. A Different World gave me the exposure to college and what it could be, what it could mean for me. So, I feel like I learned English watching Sesame Street. So I was one of those kids that was always home watching TV. No one was encouraging me to read books. So I learned English in that way. Thank you, Sesame Street. And then I think A Different World really opened my eyes to like what it would be like to go to college. And so that's one thing I want to share. The other thing I want to share is that for me, a lot of this work, like, it's dealing with white supremacy. It's like, in addition to like dealing with my own sense of insecurity sometimes, or lack mentality, or self-doubt, imposter syndromes, all those things, I think it's why I've always gravitated to like self-help books and like Jay Shetty podcasts like about spirituality and self-development. So I love those kind of, corny content. It just is uplifting to me. And I always love to hear stories that talk about hope and perseverance, right? And like we're all going to fall. And I think the one thing I wish we would talk more about is like failure is inevitable, right? Like we're always going to fail, right? If you keep trying, you're going to fail at some point. And like that's part of the process and it's okay. It doesn't mean you're bad or you're not good enough. And I just feel like I wish more teachers and schools would really share that with students, because it makes it easier. The blows make it easier. Like when you fall, like, hey, it's okay. I'm going to be fine. It's part of the thing. Right. Absolutely. And like growing up, just so, folks know some of the books that I would read, it's like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People or The Road Less Traveled. This other one, I don't know how people feel about, Robbins. Yes.
Tony Robbins. Yes.
Yes. Awaken the Giant Within. That was like my book the 90s. And like Chicken Noodle for the Soul, which is like just short bite-sized stories of like motivational stories of people's lives. I would just like eat that up. I was always in Barnes and Nobles. And I think to a degree, I still gravitate to things like that.
Got it. Okay. So is there anything else that we haven't discussed that the world should know about Karina?
I feel like, and I don't know if I told you this when we first met, but like I feel like what I do is not like, it's not just about having like a job. Like I feel like when I wake up, it's like, how do I wake up and make the world better? Like, I feel like that's why I was brought into the earth. And like, that's why I think humans in general were brought into the earth. And I just approach my life in that way. Like, how can I make things better? And so as I do this work, it's not like a chore or just to get a paycheck. It's a genuine desire to make institutions better for all of us.
I love that. Okay.
Yeah.
Karina, thanks for coming to the show.
Of course. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did and believe on the mission we're on, please like, rate, and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you're using, and share this podcast with your friends in your networks. Make sure you follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Career Cheat Code, and tell us people or careers you would like to see highlighted. See you next week with some more cheat codes. Peace.